Good morning. I just wanted you to see this gorgeous tree and to let you know I haven't forgotten you. And oh, by the way, I have blue hair now. I don't know if you can see in this light. I felt it was time for a change. And I've been busy, and I'll show you some of what I've had going on. And I just want you to keep enjoying this gorgeous weather as long as we have it. One thing I've been continuing to enjoy is this little garden I planted. It's, as you can see, fading fast. It is November after all. Also, I've been really enjoying my sukkah, which is a little hut that we build within our gazebo each fall for a holiday of Sukkot. It's very special. It's very fun, and it's always hard for me to take this down. It's really quite magical sitting in here, and every morning I write in my journal here, and it's just a blast. So I sit out here in this nirvana, and I get to look at the birds who are still going in and out of the birdhouse. Maybe they're finding a place to be a little warm in the winter. And it's so much fun sitting out here. I know we're all told not to daydream, but I would beg to differ. I think sometimes the ideas we have when we are daydreaming and just thinking about what we might want to do are when we get some of our most magical ideas. Okay, so one thing I've been wanting to do is forever is make pillow shams out of this fabric that is a sheet that matches the duvet cover that did not come with pillow shams. I'm going to use this pillow sham, which did come with another comforter. No need to reinvent the wheel. And I'm going to use the same system that it has, which is basically an overlapping flap. And I'll show you how I do that. But first, I washed the fabric. Now I need to iron it. Okay, so you can see the difference of having the fabric ironed makes a huge difference. However, you can also see the fabric's a little bit see-through, so I've decided to iron on some interfacing to not make it see-through and to give it a little more natural stiffening. Okay, so I am going to first test a sample of some interfacing that I found. It's not too thick. I don't want it really thick. I still want this to be kind of a soft pillow sham, but I'm going to sample a piece on scrap fabric to make sure it works. So I'm of course putting the fusible side down. Now, just so you know, interfacing does come both fusible and non-fusible. If you look closely, let me zoom in. Do you see how there's a bit of a bumpy texture you can see? And that is fusible. Anyway, obviously that fusible side will face the back of my fabric. I'm just going to try ironing it down and see if I like this. Okay, don't rush this part. You have to go very slowly. You have to really use a fairly high temperature, safe enough though for the fabric, nothing that the fabric can't withstand. So I've got it on the cotton setting. And you can see I need to sort of hold it in position and give it a little time to bond. All right, don't rush this. And did you notice I started at the center and I'm working my way out? Because again, you don't want those wrinkles to happen. Take your time, smooth things out first before you go. All right, it's really worth doing a sample, making sure that everything is working and that you're happy with this before you go too far. I'm going to need my other hand now. Okay, now, I flipped the fabric over. I bonded it to the wrong side, but you can see now there are still a few wrinkles. I'm going to see if I can iron that out. I needed both hands so that I could stretch the fabric to make it work. Now, you see how that fusible side is up? I do not want to get my iron there, or I could be in trouble and have that stick to my iron. You do not want that. So again, take your time, make a sample, make sure you're happy with this interfacing. You may not want to do an interfacing step. I'm choosing to. Okay, you can still slightly see through the fabric, but not like you could before. And overall, I'm happy with this. It's not too thick, it's not too stiff, but it gives me a little more body, which is what I wanted. And by the way, I'm only doing this on the front of the pillow sham, not on the back. Okay, I've now cut the interfacing. By the way, if you have a cutting surface like this and one of these blade cutters, it does make it really easier. However, that's more for people who are going to sew a lot, but it is very helpful. Notice I purposely cut the interfacing a little shorter here because I would like to keep this little green border that was at the top of the sheet. I thought about getting green piping and putting it all the way around, but I never got around to it, honestly. I'm just going to try making it, and let's see what happens. Okay, as I mentioned, I started in the center and worked my way out, slightly tacking it. By the way, I have to add water to my iron frequently. I'm using this little cup from my grandmother. There's a little bit of a crack, and so I can't really drink coffee out of it anymore, but it's so charming. Why not use it to fill my iron with water? I think it's these little ways which we can delight ourselves, which make a big difference, don't you? And by the way, do your best, but don't try to be perfect. As I always tell my students, when I worried endlessly about all the details of how I would do this, that's why it's taken me so long to get to it. Just get started. You will figure it out as you go along. How satisfying. This looks so much nicer with this interfacing, and I was able to get it to really press nicely. Loving it. Okay, I have ironed everything, but you can see I've got some interfacing sticking up that I'm just going to go ahead and trim that off. Maybe you're more perfect than I am and you got this better, but this is what I'm doing. I'll just trim it off. Okay, so I turned under twice, a little border. This is where I'm going to be overlapping, and of course I want to finish off that edge. I'm going to just do a little stitch along that edge. You see how much easier it is to sew because I pressed it in place first. And I will be stitching just inside of that folded edge. Okay, so here we are. I have hemmed this edge and the one underneath here, which I am overlapping. I have pinned everything. I usually would just pin all edges, but because I really like this top edge, I've edged this, and I'm going to attempt to sew this down here so I can still have this. Oh gosh, I hope this works. We'll see. I may do this with a basting stitch. Some of this you really just have to sort of figure out as you go along, and that's part of my method. Okay, so I am sewing right along here with my basting stitch. I can always come back and sew with a tighter, shorter stitch, but this way I can make sure if I need to take it out, it's easy to. However, the other three sides, I will go ahead and sew with a regular stitch. So remember, don't change your stitch setting until you have your needle up. Okay, here we go. Okay, now I sewed all the way around. Now remember, usually you would leave a space to turn things around, but because I have this opening here, I think I'll be able to turn it around that way. Let's see. Haha. So, good thing I decided to do that in a basting stitch, because clearly wasn't thinking that, of course, when I go to turn this inside out, that part that I wanted on the outside is, of course, on the inside. Here we go. I thought of a solution already. Now, word to the wise, before I rip out this top seam, let me just tack this side seam in place. So when I go to take this out, it will not take out the side seam with it. Okay, and after you've ripped out any seam, of course, be sure to take out the loose threads. And know that these things happen, and while some people would say, you know, if you're going to YouTube, you should really have it together first. But I always found as an art teacher that my students benefited more from seeing me make mistakes and model that, oh, I can make a mistake, I can survive it, I can find a way to work without it. And I think that's okay. That's a good thing because none of us are perfect. Of course, I would love to have you think I'm perfect, but the truth is we know it's not true. I spent way too many years in that pursuit, I will tell you. You know it's not possible, so don't make yourself crazy. Just do your best. Don't try to be perfect and try to learn from your mistakes. That's all we can do. Just want to mention that before I turn these corners around, do you see how I just mitered off that corner? That way it will turn around more easily and neatly. Here's a little trick. After you turn it around, I did miter the corners, but to make it a little crisper, I'm just going to put my closed scissors or something not too sharp inside just to poke it out a little more crisply. Okay, so next step will be to iron this really well again. You want to make sure I get the creases. Obviously I have this raw edge I'm going to have to take care of, so I will fold that under twice, sew that down, and then I will be able to line this up and sew it. I will show you. This will work. Okay, now see how nice and crisp it looks after you properly iron it? It's looking really nice. Now I have overlapped this. I have pinned it. It was coming up, one was higher. I tucked it under to pin it so it would look even. And notice I will still have this showing at the top. So I will have to stitch it here, okay? I'm going to do that. I, of course, will not be stitching this closed. This is how I will get my pillow in and out. I will also be stitching a border, but that's next. Okay, remember that little area I had to turn under? It's going to be hard to reach and to pull my machine, so I'm going to actually use a little tweezer to pull back the fabric so I can get the tension I need while I sew. Okay, things are really looking good here. Now we are almost there. Remember my original inspiration here. I'm looking at the width of the border. Okay, so I'm going to measure that border, which will just create a little selvage. In the past, I've made ruffles and so forth, but I'm looking for something not so fussy. It looks like this is 1.25 inches from the stitch line. If you don't have one of those handy tools, you can just use, yep, it's a little bit more than 1.25 inches, maybe 1 3/8 inches. So what I can do, so I am going to look on my sewing machine from where the needle will be to what 1.25 inches. So it looks like this mark. I will make a mark. Sometimes I even put a piece of tape down to give me the space that I need. Actually, this hole looks like it would kind of line up. You need something to guide you so that you know that you will keep your machine in the right alignment. You know that adage from This Old House, measure twice, cut once? They're absolutely right. So I'm going to line up 1.25 inches here, and I made a little mark. That's the vertical. However, keep in mind that up here, we're not measuring from the top edge, we're measuring from the top seam. So I will need to measure down 1.25 inches there and make like a crisscross so I will know where to measure from when I sew the top, which I will do last, okay? That's something to be aware of. Okay, I have marked this at the end of where I will be sewing as well as at the beginning. Okay, so hope that's clear. We're going to start sewing at that spot. Okay, I've been happily sewing along here. Here I measured where I needed to be, and it lined up perfectly with that little hole. Be very careful as you come up to these spots where they overlap that you've stretched everything out, and that when you sew over it, it will be in the right location and staying where it should be, flat. Okay, moment of truth time. I've sewn everything down. I've got the border that I wanted. I can't wait to see if it works. Let me stuff this pillow in. And voila, it's working. It's in here nicely. By the way, I didn't interface the back sides as I may have mentioned, but I did use an extra sturdy starch to press them. And on this side, our front side, woohoo! I am loving it. And here's my little border showing my green piping the way I wanted, and it's really feeling nice. Okay, I just have to make the second one now, which will go way faster, I promise. Probably should have pressed that out. I may take the pillow out and press that down again, just to stretch out that seam. You want everything looking nice and crisp after all this work. Okay, so even though I said it would go faster, and it will, you still want to be, again, remembering to check things. I'm glad that I didn't sew this down. I just had pressed it, and I'm going to press it again because I want this to line up just so. So you do just want to double check your measurements. Maybe you're more meticulous than I am, and if you are, good for you. If you're not, just keep checking to make sure it's going to work. Okay, I'm meticulous to a point, but what I have learned. So one thing I've learned is that if I try to be perfect or do things so meticulously exactly, it stops me from doing anything. So you do you. You do what works for you. For me, I have to allow myself to do it imperfectly so that I can actually, in fact, get started, get it done. Done is better than perfect, okay? And I'm having fun. That being said, one thing I am quite careful about is pressing often. I remember when I was about, I don't know, when I was really getting into sewing, I think I was about 12, and I spent my allowance and my babysitting money on a book on sewing techniques. And one thing I remember it saying is press now or pay later. So I am rather careful about continually going back and pressing. It does make a difference. Okay, here's another trick that you have to be aware of. So I started to set this up. I want the larger panel down first so that the smaller panel will be behind when I sew it. And look, I hemmed the wrong side because I was doing it the same way on both sides. So no worries, I will just hem this side as well because I want that to line up properly, and of course I want this to be finished off. No worries, everything is figure-outable. That's a quote I got from Marie Forleo, whose mother came up with that, and I thought it was fabulous. Great expression. Everything is figure-outable. Thanks, Marie Forleo. I could turn it under twice and sew it down like I did up here, but as you could see, I was a little shy on space. So since I have something called seam binding, I'm actually going to tuck this in and sew that down to enclose it without making this shorter than it already is. Okay, so you know how I try not to make the same mistake twice. So I did sew on this bias trim. I've got that lined up now. I've got this pinned down. I decided to just give it a little tack on top and bottom of the two sides that I want overlapping, so that as I sew these sides down, it will go better. I'm lining it all up. And then, remember this time, I'm going to learn from my mistake last time. I will only sew around the three sides, bottom and sides, and I will leave the top open until after I turn it around, and then I will sew that down. Okay? Okay, finished product. I am very happy with the way it came out, and I hope you like it too. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon with another project.